want to thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs for those very remarkable statements that welcomes us to Algiers and for the need for us to continue to work assiduously to ensure that the common African position is pursued and protected. Thank you. Your Excellency, my esteemed co-chair, Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community abroad of Algeria, Excellencies, colleague ministers, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union Commission, permanent representatives from Addis Ababa and New York, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by conveying warm fraternal greetings to His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone and Coordinator of the African Union Committee of 10 Heads of State and Government on the Reform of the United Nations Security Council, to his brother and colleague, His Excellency Abdelmajid Tebboune, President of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, our generous host, and to the entire C-10 family here present. Let me extend my profound thanks and appreciation to the government and people of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria for consenting to host this all-important ministerial meeting and for according us warm and excellent hospitality that we've enjoyed since our arrival in this beautiful city of Algiers. Of course, not to forget to render a special thanks and appreciation to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for regaling us with a sumptuous dinner last night in the historic Roman city of Tipaza, where we proudly gaze at the crimson and gilded departure of the sun over the Mediterranean Sea. At the end of the feast, it reminded me, of course, of the assertion of Chinua Achebe in his book Things Fall Apart, when he said, when a man calls his brothers to his hut to feast, it doesn't mean that they are starving. But when we gather at the moonlight village ground, it doesn't mean we don't see the sun from our own compounds. We do so because kingsmen have to do so to consolidate their kindred bond. And that is the reason why we are here today. I would also like to extend appreciation and gratitude to the African Union Commission for its role in facilitating the work of the C-10 generally and for the services put at our disposal for this meeting in particular. Excellencies, this 11th ministerial level meeting is essentially geared towards pursuing a legitimate cause on behalf of the African continent. Specifically, it provides us the opportunity as C-10 foreign ministers to take stock of progress made towards designing a comprehensive roadmap and evaluating the current state of play in the ongoing intergovernmental negotiations at the United Nations General Assembly, with a view to reaching a consensus on enhancing the mandate to canvass, promote, and defend the common African position on the reform of the United Nations Security Council. We are further expected to propose feasible recommendations to our heads of state and government for their decision-making in the outcome document drafted by our senior officials. We are also to provide guidance to our permanent representatives in New York as they embark on enhanced engagement in the IGN process. And our main objective in this meeting, therefore, is to ensure that any recommendations we propose for consideration by the heads of state and government should be forward-looking and action-oriented. It must ultimately be geared towards speedily rectifying the historical injustice of Africa's non-representation in the permanent category and underrepresentation in the non-permanent category of the UN Security Council. At the same time, we should be mindful of preserving the integrity of the common African position and the unity of our continent. It is critically important to understand the root cause of the injustice that we are trying to rectify if we are to get it right. Without being sentimental, there is a universal recognition of historical injustices born out over 200 years of colonization, which invariably led to the exclusion of Africa from post-World War II intergovernmental bodies such as the Bretton Woods institutions, that is the World Bank and the IMF. Similarly, several attempts initiating reforms at the level of the United Nations Security Council have been roundly resisted in a bid to maintain the status quo, although it remains untenable in light of present geopolitical realities. Among other things, this is why we now seek to achieve equitable representation for Africa in the Council in line with the Common African Position as espoused in the Ezulwini Consensus and the SAT Declaration. Africa, our heads of state and government have said, must be given the utmost priority and be treated as a special case. In essence, the proposed 2 seats in the permanent category and the 5 seats in the non-permanent category, which Africa is demanding, is nothing more than ensuring that the principle of equitable geographical representation, as articulated in Article 23 of the UN Charter, is adhered to. We all know that there can be no proper rectification of the historical injustice without Africa's representation in the permanent category. Africa remains the only major geographical continental entity that is not represented in the permanent category. Additionally, there can further be no fair and just representation of Africa in the permanent category without the right to the veto. It therefore goes without saying, ladies and gentlemen, that if member states of the UN Security Council wish to retain the veto, then it must be extended to all new permanent members. Of course, the mode of representation for Africa can best be determined on the basis of a mechanism to be set out by the African Union when we reach that stage. Excellencies, it is obvious by now that the Common African Position has attracted significant global traction over the years, to the point where it has been regarded as the most viable position and generally indicating a point of convergence within the framework of the ING in New York. The revised co-chairs element paper on convergences and divergences on the question of equitable representation on an increase in the membership of the Security Council and related matters of 29th April 2014, 24, which was shared by the co-chairs of the IGN of the ongoing 78th session, state as follows, and I quote, "There is a wider recognition and broader support by member states for the legitimate aspiration of the African countries to play their rightful role on the global stage, including through an increased presence in the Security Council as reflected in the Ezulwini Consensus and the SAT Declaration adopted by the African Union in 2005. Redressing the historical injustice against Africa is viewed as a priority, and several delegations emphasized that Africa should be treated as a special case," end of quote. Despite this overwhelming support for the Common African Position, early reform has not been achieved as called for in 2005 World Summit outcome. Further, the IGN process has not moved forward significantly over the years. This is as a result of divergences between member states on both procedural and substantive issues. It is therefore imperative that our heads of state and government are advised on the need to issue directives on the procedural issues as to guide the IGN process. It is the considered view that substantive issues can no longer be meaningfully advanced if the procedural issues such as text-based negotiations and the main reform model of the IGN are not moved forward or not appropriately resolved. The issue of the text-based negotiations is complex and potentially divisive, even for the African group, to say the least. The African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government had previously decided that it was premature to engage in text-based negotiations. The C-10 Heads of State and Government decided in the Oyala Summit that Africa is to only engage in text-based negotiations provided there is a prior consensus among all member states of the United Nations on the 5 clusters and an agreed framework which broadly addresses the issue of historical injustice that has wide consensus and a model of reform which clearly addresses expansion in both categories of the UN Security Council. This was endorsed by the AU Assembly of Heads of State in February this year. This approach should thus be considered as the way forward in the IGN process on text-based negotiations. In this vein, we should make swift use of the opportunity to move forward in our overall aspirations as a continent. I am particularly minded to say, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, that an affirmative stance from Africa based on our inimitable resolve and proposals on the issue of reform will no doubt weigh positively on the successful conclusion of the IGN process. In this regard, in the next session of the IGN, we need to present our model of reform based on the common African position as espoused in the Ezulwini Consensus and the SAT Declaration, not only because other interest groups and members states have presented models this session, but more importantly, to clearly show the uniqueness and viability of the common African position. Furthermore, the input from the IGN to the Summit of the Future in September this year is critical in terms of reflecting the need for Africa to be treated as a special case in the reform process and be prioritized in order to rectify the historical injustice done to our continent. We must thus ensure through our ambassadors in New York that this view is reflected in the inputs to the Summit of the Future at the barest minimum. Excellencies, the imperative for a structural reform of the Council is now a necessary and sufficient condition for maintaining international peace and security, especially in light of the current geopolitical dynamics wherein the Council is constrained to act promptly and decisively on issues of global concern. Sierra Leone and Algeria can attest to the inefficiencies and inability of the Council to decisively act, having been elected members for the past 5 months. Consequently, the Council is in dire need of holistic reforms that will reflect a more inclusive, transparent, accountable, and democratic organ that is fully revitalized to resolve conflict or prevent their escalation whilst taking proactive measures to avert threats to global peace and security. Let me take this opportunity to inform this august body that in a bid to pursue the reform of the Council, Sierra Leone will convene a signature event, a debate on rectifying the historical injustice to Africa during our presidency of the UN Security Council in August this year. All C-10 member states are therefore invited to participate at the highest level. The Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the 78th session of the General Assembly have kindly consented to brief in this event. In conclusion, Excellencies, I can only entreat us to stay focused and determined to achieve our goal for equitable representation with all the attendant rights and privileges as outlined hitherto, whilst also remaining cohesive and unanimous on all aspects of the reform process and speaking with one voice. Finally, on behalf of my colleague foreign ministers, I wish to acknowledge the great efforts and the enduring commitment of our esteemed ambassadors and experts, as was demonstrated yesterday at the meeting of senior officials. And I urge you all to remain steadfast to the cause that will correct the historical injustice that is meted to our continent. On that note of gratitude, I wish us all very successful deliberations, and I thank you for your attention. On that note, Excellencies, may I now kindly invite the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union, Excellency.
Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Sierra Leone and Coordinator of the Committee of 10 of the African Union on the United Nations Security Council reform at ministerial level. Excellency, my dear brother, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community abroad of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, our enviable host today. Distinguished members, ministers of the Committee of 10, ambassadors, and permanent representatives based in Addis Ababa and New York, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Our two main speakers have said it all, but permit me, on behalf of His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, to make a few comments to complement what our two ministers have stated. It is important before doing this to express profound, profuse appreciation to the government and people of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria. The hospitality is usually very legendary. And once again, the African Union really appreciates your support for this process, being a champion for counterterrorism, being a champion for the African voice at the international level. Let me also use this opportunity to thank the coordinator at Heads of State and Government level, His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, for his stewardship and leadership. Excellencies, I have few imperatives, 5 of them that the chairperson of the Commission, African Union Commission, has expressed interest for your deliberations today. The first is to consider the geopolitical context, where multilateralism is waning. We see the rise of populist national parties and candidates in Europe, in America, and most unfortunately, we see double standards when it comes to Israel and Gaza, when it comes to the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Second imperative is the continued relevance and strategic importance of the El Zuwini Consensus and SILT Declaration. The third imperative is that the Oyala Roadmap endorsed in November 2023 in Equatorial Guinea remains of importance in terms of implementation. The fourth imperative, as our two ministers have already stated, is that global governance must change for better. The role of the African Union, now a full member in the group of 20, is a welcome development. Not enough. We need to achieve UN Security Council reform, an expansion that is legitimate, that is transparent, that is inclusive, and that works for Africa. The fifth imperative from the chairperson of the Commission is that the intergovernmental negotiations must change and work for better. It is too slow. It must be reworked for the betterment of our goals. Finally, it is necessary for your Committee of 10 to start considering forging like-minded partnerships for this goal, ultimate goal, to achieve a reformed United Nations Security Council. In conclusion, Excellencies, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, also means the United Nations we need. We must build a United Nations that is effective, that is inclusive, that is efficient, and most importantly, that is pro-Africa. Our goal in Aspiration 7, as Agenda 2063 says, an Africa that is strong, that is united, that is resilient, and that is influential. It is for us to become a dynamic force in global affairs, given our history. We can no longer accept marginalization of Africa. We can no longer accept global discourage issues being placed on our agenda. We need global convergence. It is Africa's legitimate demand. Africa will not relent because the future belongs to the Africa. The century must be African. It is our right. I believe these messages will also resonate today in your meeting, and we wish you the best. Thank you so much, Excellencies.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Commissioner Bankole, especially for reverberating the 5 imperatives expressed by the chair of the AUC, in that we have to take cognizance of the dynamics of our present-day geopolitics and also the importance of staying true to the Zulwini Consensus and the SAT Declaration on implementing the Oyala Roadmap, and of course, also taking cognizance of change in global governance to ensure that Africa gets its right position in multilateral spaces. And finally, he reiterated the concern expressed by the chair of the Commission that the IGN should stoke up its effort to accelerate the process of intergovernmental negotiation. On that note, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request that the media humbly excuses us as we are entering a closed-door discussion. When they're needed, we'll call them back to the room. Thank you.